Okay, this is a brief little video about how to get set up. So the first thing is there's a power cable. You have to plug the power cable in. You know, you'll start and it won't be plugged in, so you got to plug the power cable into the back. Nothing else in the back you really need. Power cable gets plugged in. Then you have an instrument cable. This is called a 1/4-inch cable. It's a standard guitar cable. We're going to use this amp has 2 channels, a 1 and a 2. So technically 2 instruments could go in it, but we're just going to do 1, obviously. And we're going to plug the cable. We're going to use channel 1. Now what I've done is I drew a little black dot. I figured out some settings that work well with this violin that I think will sound good. Sorry, it's dusty. Ignore that. So I put little black dots by where the settings need to be. So then the power switch here, so you've got the cable in there, then you have the other side of the cable in the back of the violin. This particular cable, this is called an L or an angled end, and then it's a straight end. It doesn't really matter. I think this works better. I think you still can put a shoulder rest on and get it to work with that. I don't think the L shape works on the other side, but you can see that. Okay, so before we get the amp going, the first and really important thing is this violin uses one of those watch batteries. There's no indicator to tell if it's low battery. So my suggestion is always have extra backup batteries and always just change the battery before a performance, because you're gonna not have any way to know if you're on low battery except when it just stops working. And that actually happened once. So I have some batteries in the case here. Just always have a couple extras. You know, if you're at a rehearsal, it's no big deal to stop and put one in. You kind of need like a knife or like a butter knife or a flathead screwdriver to sort of get it out of there. But it's not that big a deal. But if you don't have a battery, then it is I would just change it before performance. That's just my suggestion. Okay, so we turn the thing on. I don't care if you fool around with these knobs, but I just wrote those little black dots because I think that's where it's going to sound best, just based on my experience with this. If you're using this in a performance or rehearsal, I feel like the amp itself, it really needs to be sitting on an amp stand, but you can use a chair. If you put it down on the floor, the sound is going to be coming out towards your feet, and it's not really going to project very well out to the audience, nor your own ears. So I would always set it up on a chair. Don't set your amp on the floor. That's like an amateur thing. I mean, this amp does have a way where you can sort of angle it up, but it doesn't stay up that well. So I just put it on a chair. I used to have an amp stand somewhere, but I don't know where it is. So whatever, a chair is fine. So I'd always just set it on a chair. Understand that we're using just channel 1, so you only really have to use the knobs on the top. The master volume is going to be the main one you have to set. And my suggestion is, it's sometimes hard to know when you're standing on stage if you're too loud or too soft. You know, if you have a dress rehearsal or whatever, maybe have a helper, mom, dad, somebody who can sit out in the audience and kind of just give you thumbs up, meaning needs to be louder, thumbs down needs to be quieter. But just know, you know, like start by just adjusting like a tiny bit, because it can go from nothing to blasting really quickly. You can also adjust the volume by this gain, but gain is different than volume, master volume. And I like to just kind of have the gain on the low side, because if you can see, let me see if I can hold the phone and play at the same time. If I turn this gain up too much, like double stops and stuff, they sound like distorted. Sounds like distorted rock guitar, which is probably not what you want to sound like on the violin. So, I mean, you can turn it up here, and it's going to sound better if you just use the master. I don't think you're going to need to go louder, like louder than it can go. If you got all the way to there and you felt like it needed to go louder, you could use the gain a little bit, and that would also make it louder. But I don't think you're going to need to do that with jazz. Would be total like metal or something. I don't know. Anyway, so I like to, you can play around with all these, and if you can adjust them how you want, but I put the dots there so that if you get it adjusted and then you feel like it doesn't sound as good anymore, you know where to go back to. I like to kind of have the low on a little bit, but not too much, because if you have too much low, it doesn't sound good for a violin. And you also don't want too much high, because then it gets really screechy sounding. I would always keep this anti-feedback one all the way up. That's super important, because feedback is that kind of loud blasting stuff you don't want. I think for electric violin, you need to do reverb 1, so I would just have it on reverb 1. You don't need to use effects B. These are other effects. You can play around with them for fun, but I don't think they would be appropriate for jazz. The time and the aux level, that has to do with effect A. These are very sensitive, and it goes from having like some reverb. So like, you know, if you go here, you know, it sounds like you're playing in like a huge cathedral or something. It's probably going to sound like more than what you want, but you have to sort of listen out in the hall, because it's not what you hear right next to you is not what's going to sound out to the audience. So this is just based on my experience, what I think is probably going to sound the best. I would have the pad on, just have that on. You don't need the phase on or anything, or like I said, you don't need effects B. This is a headphone thing if you wanted to listen in headphones. You don't really need phantom power. That's all for other stuff. That's if you're powering other things. I think that's the basic. Like I said, I would have the amp up. If I were performing, I would probably want to stand so that the amp was a little bit behind me, but not, I wouldn't stand directly in front of it, because if you stand directly in front of it in a performance, you're blocking the sound going out to the audience. However, if you put the amp out in front of you, then all of your sound is not going to your ears, and it's really hard because there's almost no sound. You know, if you turn the amp off or turn the volume all the way off, you're not going to get very much sound, and it's going to be hard. You're not going to be able to hear yourself. So this thing is also like your way to hear your instrument. So I would sort of have it up on a chair, like behind you, but a little bit to the side. Just make sure nobody's standing directly in front of your instrument, or don't like set it right behind a piano or something that would be blocking it, because then it sort of totally defeats the purpose of having an amp. On this violin, let me see it. There are these two knobs here. Okay. This one is basic volume. So it goes from here, like 1 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Actually, what I would do, I would get the volume you want with the master. Maybe we could turn the gain up a tiny bit. I would get the volume you want, maybe so that you're about here. So that on stage, if you needed to go a little louder, like for a solo or whatever, this gives you a little room that you could make it louder without having to go and play with your amp in the middle of a concert. Because that looks weird if you're like turning around and playing with your buttons on your amp. You don't want to do that. So if you go here, this could also turn you off. Like if you like are not playing on a song or something, you know, you could just basically kind of turn it off without going over to your amp with that. But I would leave it like this. This thing is called, this is the preamp. This violin has something called a built-in preamp. You don't even have to worry about it. Yeah, the gain, I guess I have it a little bit higher, but... I think this is probably going to be loud enough, but if you need to, you can go higher on the gain. Like now I'm at max. I don't know. It depends on how loud the whole thing is. You could go up on the gain, but just know if you get it too much, it's going to have that like distorted rock guitar sound, and you probably don't want that. You know, the other thing that can happen if on a big stage, like I don't know if you're playing in the Kimmel Center or whatever, and I don't know what the equipment they have is, but sometimes what happens is you have your amp set up on like a nice medium, and then they put a microphone in front of the amp so that the stage volume isn't so loud. I don't know if they're using mics in any of your grips, but if they are, and you feel like you've got these settings right where you want them to be, you don't want it necessarily louder on stage, but it could use to be louder out in the hall. I don't know what kind of setup they have, but that's another way to go about this, is they put a little mic on a mic stand. There's certain kind of mics you can kind of hang over that. If you need that, just let me know. I actually have a mic. I probably have a mic stand somewhere. I can lend it to you. I feel like that's probably not going to be needed. But that's what you do when they're sort of mixing you through a full group sound system, a PA, and they want you in the mix and not in your own separate thing. Or if you're just using this to hear yourself on stage, and then they want to make you louder out in the house. There's actually also an auxiliary out on the back. If there's actually a legit sound person, they'll understand how to do this. So there's an XLR cable that they could take out, which is the same as a microphone cable. They could take that out and run a line from this amp to the main sound system to make it louder in the main sound system, if there is sort of some main sound system. I'm guessing that's not, because it's jazz, so there's probably all the horns and everything are just acoustic, and then it's probably just maybe the electric and bass guitar, and then you that have an amp, and you're just using the color of the amp to be your sound. So that's probably not going to be a thing, but we can talk about that, and I can help you about that. Like I said, I have this is mute. If you needed for any reason to just make it so no sound came out. Sometimes, like before a concert, you set up all your stuff and you do that. I guess one thing to do is never take the cable out with the amp on. Let's see if it'll work. Okay, there was a little popping sound. And then you hear, now we have the live cable sound. Set this thing down. Gosh, I'm so disrespectful to this violin. I have a place to set it right now. You can hear the live sound. That's because I have this unplugged cable. And if you turn this stuff up, then you can get feedback and all this stuff. So never unplug your cable with your amp on. Either mute it or turn it off. For example, if you were having a sound check or a rehearsal before a concert, you might want to get everything set up. I can actually lend you a violin stand too. You'd have your violin sitting in the stand, have it all on, and then just mute the channel. And then when you get on stage, then you pick, this is what guitar players do. Their guitar's sitting in a little stand. Everything's all plugged in. It's all on. It's ready to go. And then you just, when you walk up on stage, you just unmute, and then you're ready to play. You can plug in, you can, walk. If you were going to walk on holding the instrument, then I would have the cable plugged in, just not plugged into this side of the instrument, get on stage, plug it in, and then turn the amp on. But sometimes that's like too much for a stage concert, like that's a lot of fussing around. So my suggestion would be, like, if you're going to play this in a concert, have it all set it up, have everything on, have it all ready to go, have the violin sitting in a violin stand, and then just mute it. And then when you come on to play, unmute, and then you're ready to go. And then mute it back, especially if you're not the last group on the concert, set it back in the stand, and then come back and collect it, turn it all off and collect it at the end of the concert. I think that's probably all you need to know for right now, but we can troubleshoot it later.